welcome to part 2, I guess, of the Buddy analysis series. I guess it's technically part 3 because this is my 3rd video on it, but this is like part 2 of season 5. I just want to say to anyone that's coming back after watching my previous video, thank you. Thank you for the love on that video and the one about seasons 2 till 4. I really do appreciate it. And thank you to anyone that subscribed. Because of that, you haven't seen much return on investment because I have not uploaded a video since, because my life has been crazy and my voice sounds like shit at the minute because I'm still recovering from COVID. I had COVID 2 weeks ago and I feel fine now, but my voice still sounds gravelly, and it's not helping that I'm drinking a massive coffee. We're going to be discussing the second half of season 5 of 911, specifically like Buck and Eddie's relationship, my thoughts on if I want them to happen, if I think it could happen, and about like other relationships that they're in, more specifically Buck, because he had a couple relationships going on this season which I will discuss and give my 2 cents, and Eddie was just more focusing on himself, which I love a lot because it was about damn time, let's be real. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. I was about to say let's get into the news, like Keemstar, but like fuck that guy. As much as saying that would be a meme, fuck that guy. The first section I'm going to talk about is Buck and Lucy. Lucy is a new character introduced in the pilot of 5B, aka episode 11. She's basically introduced as the female version of Buck, and in interviews she was described as a breath of fresh air, and I'm like, if you're the female version of an already established character, how is that a breath of fresh air? But anyway, we're introduced to her in episode 11. She's kind of a badass, and I did really like her when she met the team and she did that rescue. As reckless as what she did was, I thought it was really cool. But again, female version of Buck probably would have done a similar thing and has done similar things in previous seasons. But now he's like a bit more, I wouldn't say tame, but he's like really kind of matured, and it's really shown throughout the series. Anyway, after that rescue, the 118 and a couple other firefighters, including Lucy, go out to a bar, basically to like celebrate their big rescue. And Lucy's flirting with Buck, and a lot of people didn't like her for this, and I'm just thinking, I think Buck's the bad guy in, not for this, but like for further stuff, but I don't think it's her fault, because like how is she to know that Buck has a girlfriend if she's not there? I just think that a lot of blame was like put on her, internalized misogyny or whatever. Lucy's flirting with Buck. Buck's like a little bit uncomfortable, but he's not like really saying anything explicit like I have a girlfriend or anything like that. He's just kind of like, and she's like, I like watching you squirm.
Relax, Buckley. I just like watching you squirm.
It's obvious that she's trying to flirt, but he's not explicitly saying anything. So anyway, Lucy ends up kissing Buck, which like, if that was it, fine. But then Buck kissed her back, and I was like, Buck, no. All your character development just went in the drain. I watched like this entire second part with my housemates, and illy them, they're fantastic. But I was just like, no, I can't believe Buck cheated. And one of them said, Buck's cheated before. And I'm just like, bitch, where? We are not watching the same show. Buck has never cheated. He is super loyal. At the beginning of season 2, when Abby clearly left him, he was still loyal to her, living in her apartment, refusing to date new people. Like, he is as loyal as a golden retriever. He is my golden retriever boy, and mine specifically. I really dislike how Lucy was firstly introduced as like a female version of Buck. Like, get a other personality. It's not Lucy's fault. It's not the actress that plays her's fault. In fact, Ariel Kibble is an absolute queen. I am basing that entirely off of her performance in American Pie Band Camp. That was one of my gay awakenings. Let's be real, before I even realized I was gay, I was like, this woman's very pretty. And she still is. Yeah, I think, and yeah, I'm gonna go on a tangent after tangent after tangent, but the whole Twitter timeline, we were like, she's gonna be a lesbian. And then she kisses Buck. And we're like, I thought she was gonna be like our LGBT icon. She could still be bi, pan, any other label other than straight. But from what we've seen so far, she is hetero, and that makes me sad. The writers, I feel like they don't know how to write women, especially love interests. Like, I hate how Lucy, she could have been just like a badass firefighter, and that would have been fine. But they had to introduce her as like a love interest in order to kind of like only really fuel Buck's storyline. Like, she didn't really get to kind of do anything. I feel like the show doesn't know how to write love interests either. Like, in my opinion, Anna was okay. She had her moments where I was like, girl, that's problematic as shit. But overall, I thought she was okay. She was mostly respectful, but like Lucy and Taylor, they're just so boring in my opinion. Again, nothing against these actresses. It's just more like the writers not knowing what to do with these people, so they're just written very poorly and they come across boring at best and problematic at worst. It just sucks how these women don't really get a personality other than to like further the storyline of male characters. With that being said, there are some amazing female characters. Maddie is honestly probably my favorite character in the show. Either her or Eddie, like they're both very up there for me. Athena and Hen are also amazing, likable, complex female characters. So anyway, back to Lucy. At the end of the episode, Buck thinks that, you know, he's in the clear because he's never gonna have to see Lucy again. He thinks, well, it's not gonna be a big deal. I can probably hide this, maybe not even have to tell Taylor, his girlfriend. But surprise, surprise, guess who joins the 118? It's Lucy! I feel like her entrance was so awkward because she's kind of just like standing there. She really thought she did something, but yeah, didn't really do anything for me. I don't have like heaps complex notes after this. One, because she was boring and I didn't really care. But second of all, after like episode 13, like the notes after that were like written while I'm still like brain fog COVID brain, which is still me. Like this morning I was trying to explain that I have brain fog, but I said I have brain frog. So I think that's an indication of where my head's been at for the past like 3 weeks. So anyway, in 513 they get called to an emergency and they try and do a funny by making Buck be awkward around Lucy because he doesn't really know how to act around her after the kiss, which makes sense. But like it didn't really hit the way that they wanted it to hit. It's just kind of like, dude, we get it. Thankfully they didn't really do this afterward and they got along quite well. It was either this episode or another episode where Buck gives Lucy really good advice, because Lucy was like, I shouldn't have saved that woman after doing like a miraculous save, and she's just like really in her head about it. And I'm just thinking, like, just be grateful that like the woman survived, because like we had it in season 1 where Buck was really in his head because he tried to save someone but that person like died, and like that was interesting. But her being like, I can't believe I saved her, shouldn't have saved her, like what if something went wrong? And like I understand, but for it to be like the whole episode, it's just, I don't know. The episode 16, there's a fire at 911 dispatch. I'll talk more about that in other sections if it seems relevant. There's like a fire at the dispatch, and after everyone's like been saved and like gotten out of the dispatch building, Buck is kind of in an emotional state because Captain Nash, I wrote Daddy Nash, I'm so so sorry. Daddy Nash, he got kind of injured because like the roof of the building like fell on him, and like he was fine, like he was all good, but Buck was just kind of in a state because, you know, watching someone you care about be hurt, especially someone who is like a father figure to him, that would have been distressing. So Lucy is comforting him, saying like he's gonna be fine, like nothing serious happened. And we see Taylor, his girlfriend, in the background noticing this interaction, and she kind of like reads it wrong, but like also she's kind of right, because like there was something going on between them, like not anymore, but she just kind of reads it as something is up between the two, even though that's not really the situation. She was just trying to be a good friend. The next section is Buck and Taylor. This is where some shit gets juicy. So in episode 11, Buck goes to tell Taylor about kissing Lucy and describes their relationship as the most functional relationship he's ever been in, which isn't really, I don't know, it's definitely one way to talk about someone you're in a relationship with. But instead of, you know, telling Taylor what happened, he asked Taylor to move in with him, which was a big mistake. And I was really mad at Buck in this episode because, I mean, one, he cheated. That's very out of character because he's very loyal. But second of all, asking someone to move in with you under false pretenses, it's gonna get messy because the truth is gonna come out, and that's where episode 13 comes in. So Taylor moves her stuff in, and Buck tells her that he kissed someone. He specifically says, I kissed someone, another woman, because he's obviously very straight. Babe, just say you're bi. It's literally okay. I will love you and I will accept you and I will embrace you as our community ambassador. Buck tells Taylor, and she's mad, obviously, and she goes to like leave the apartment, and Buck asks if she'll be back, and she says, yeah, because I have no other place to go. You made sure of that. And she kind of snapped in this, not gonna lie. Like, I don't really like her for reasons which I will explain later, but she was 100% right in this scenario. And Buck basically tells her about when he kissed Lucy, but he doesn't say that it was Lucy. He just said it was another woman. There's a difference between like a stranger at a bar, which Taylor thinks it was, and someone that you're working with. Later in the episode, Taylor comes back, they reconcile, they don't break up, which, I mean, like, do whatever you gotta do in a relationship. Like, I'm not the relationship police, but I don't know, I just really wanted them to break up because I don't think they're good together. On a kind of divergent thing, I explained to my housemates that I don't like Taylor, and one of them, actually both of them, said that they think Taylor's been good for Buck, and I'm just like, again, are we watching the same show? It seems like they only use each other to get information from each other. Taylor for like journalism sources, which will bite her in the ass later, and Buck to help Eddie out, which I'll talk to in the buddy section. Anyway, Taylor says no more lies, and that's gonna bite her in the ass later, majorly. So here's where shit gets juicy. In episode 17, two of the other firefighters slash paramedics, Hen and Chimney, go to Buck and Taylor's apartment because they believe that Jonah, one of the new firefighters slash paramedic, killed one of the dispatchers in the dispatch fire. Taylor tells them that like any information they tell her is off the record, but she attempts to run the story before Buck catches her and calls her out for it. Taylor promises Buck that she won't run the story. I understand Taylor's motivations here. She has knowledge that a potential serial killer is using his powers as a paramedic to bring his patients towards the brink of death so that he can play the hero and bring them back to life. However, she did promise to keep things off the record. And additionally, Captain Nash and like the rest of the 118, and I think even like the chief firefighter people, like the people up top, are doing like their own internal investigations just in case it turns out to be false. Because if like Taylor did run the story and it did end up being false, they've just ruined a man's reputation and possibly his career. I feel like if I was Taylor in this situation and I was genuinely concerned, I would go to the police and see if like there is any merit to her accusations and let them do their job. And additionally, one of the characters, Athena, she is a police officer, specifically a police sergeant, and Taylor and Athena have met. So like she could possibly go to Athena if she doesn't want to go through official channels, just to see like, hey, there's this like, you know, potential serial killer using his paramedic job to try and bring people back to life. But, you know, depending on people's medical history, like the drugs that he uses could, you know, mix with those drugs in a bad way, so then they end up dying, which is what happened to one of the dispatchers, Claudette. You know, just using that information to tell Athena and be like, I think this might be happening, but I'm not sure. Is there a way that you can do like an investigation on the down low? Towards the end of the episode, Jonah is arrested because he was like using drugs to like stop Chimney's heart and then bring him back to life. So Taylor's reporting on this and says that sources close to paramedic Greenaway had seen that there were multiple suspicious incidents that happened while he was on the job. And Buck is mad at this. Obviously he's watching it on the TV because she promised him everything would be off the record. And again, I understand her motivations, like the public deserve to know what this paramedic has done, especially if like an accidental death that happened while Jonah was taking care of these patients, because like the family deserve to know if, you know, their loved one's death could have been prevented. However, from Buck's perspective, it seems like she was using his information as a way to progress her career. And Captain Nash says at the beginning of the next episode, it would have been better if like the fire chiefs or whatever reported on this, because then they could control the narrative and it would be more like controlled, I guess, as opposed to a reporter from the outside reporting on it when she might not have all the information. In the final episode, episode 18, Taylor says she's sorry that Buck's upset about the story, but not that she broke the story. Buck explains that this is literally their first argument that they had. They weren't dating at the time, but she was introduced in season 2, episode 6, where she attempted to film Captain Nash while he was drugged, which is bad for multiple reasons, but especially because Captain Nash is an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he was sober for I think a year at that point, and to have video evidence of him losing his sobriety out of his control as well would just be like horrible. She didn't end up running the story, but like the principle is that she had some information that could have been damning and chose to run it even though it wouldn't have been the ethical thing to do. Then Buck says things need to be different and he breaks up with her. My king, my king. I'm so proud of him because in other relationships he's either been dumped or ghosted, so it's nice to see him taking the initiative, realizing this relationship isn't working, I'm gonna end things. So in the ending montage of the season, Taylor gives her key back to Buck and he looks so relieved when she leaves. Like genuinely, why does he look happier when she leaves than when she told him she loved him for the first time?
Oh, baby, that's sad.
Next section is about Eddie. I love Eddie this season. I love him every season, but especially this season because he had some amazing character development, some brilliant storylines, some beautifully written storylines. So in this season, kind of just like a general note, he's very tired, especially for like the first half of the second half of the season, if that makes sense. And the mental health storyline as a whole was so well executed. I think just mental health in general this season was so brilliantly done. There were two main storylines that happened. The first one was Eddie's, and the second one was Maddie's, which was a big chunk of episode 12, which I won't really talk about in this video because no real buddy content happened. But honestly, and correlation does not mean causation, by the way, when I say the next thing, but episode 12 was the best episode this season just because it really dove into Maddie's storyline so well, her postpartum depression, her getting the help that she needed, her reuniting with her daughter and Chimney. It was just really, really beautiful. And the way that they spoke about mental health and suicide and postpartum depression, it was just really nice to see that they did it justice because it could have easily been shit, but it was good. I did like one note, like just one dot point about a scene. I'll try and explain it best from memory. Eddie basically left the fire fam at the end of episode 10. So when the second half of the season begins, he's working basically as like a Twitter intern. I don't know like the technical name of his job, but like he runs like the LA Metro firefighting Twitter page. He's like the media guy, which is so funny because he hates technology. After working this job that we see him hate because of the Squidward montage, he goes to Captain Nash's house and basically asks for a transfer, but he looks like so tired, like borderline like serial killer vibes, which personally I found very attractive. Skinny men who look like they haven't slept in 5 years, that's literally my type. I can't explain to you how attractive I found Eddie. Like the makeup department tried to make him not look ugly, but just like very deflated, and people were like, he looks like hell, and I'm like, what the hell I want to be in? Yeah, he goes to Bobby's house, asks for a transfer, and Bobby's like, no offense, but are you okay? I can't give you a transfer unless you take like a psych evaluation. And he's like, I'm fine, at least I will be when I get my job back. And he's like rambly and yeah, just really takes offense to being like, I'm not crazy.
You know, when the brass was coming for you and they're trying to fire you, I had your back. I supported you, and now you're trying to turn on me?
Eddie, that's not what's going on here. I'm looking after you.
You're gonna stand there with 100-something bodies on you and tell me I'm not fit for duty? Go to hell, Bobby.
Whoa, you didn't have to go so hard like that. Like, Eddie's usually like a very nice guy, so this just like kind of showed where his mental state was at and that like he wasn't really thinking clearly. In episode 13, I hope I explained that well, by the way. In episode 13, he starts going to therapy, and we love this. When I saw the trailer for 5B, I thought he'd start therapy after having the breakdown, because we also saw him having a breakdown in one of the trailers. But I'm glad he started therapy before the breakdown, because either because Bobby said so or because he realized what he said to Bobby was fucked up. He starts going to therapy, and I like this initiative a lot. There's a call in this episode about like a fearless woman who's like about to like jump, essentially like try and commit suicide, because like she just like doesn't really feel afraid of anything. And like Eddie's listening in to the call on his like little radio thingy, and he just really seems to relate a lot to her, and like her basically saying that like she's scared of like not feeling anything, and like Eddie seems to relate to that, which is like really heartbreaking. I wrote about like the breakdown scene in the buddy section, but I think it just makes sense to talk about it here. Everyone on Twitter was basically counting down to like the breakdown scene. When we found out Buck was gonna be there, everyone was like, Buck's in the room. The room just became like very notorious. The breakdown scene. Okay, this was so well done, by the way. Holy shit. It basically starts with Eddie closing the door to the room. I still don't know what part of the house this is. If anyone's smarter than me, please let me know what room this was, because it doesn't look like a bedroom. It's definitely not a kitchen. It's not like a laundry room, I don't think. It's just some fucking room, and I appreciate that. you know, shout out to the room. He closes the door to the room because as part of his therapy, Frank's therapist, Frank suggests that he talks to people who can kind of relate to his trauma. And part of it surrounds his survivor's guilt about being in the army and not being able to save everyone, even though he like did the best he could, you know, being an army medic and everything. So he calls a couple people that he served with. After he does these calls, he starts breaking shit, like punching walls, like all that kind of stuff, because he got some bad news. Chris like hears this and he tries to get into the room. Chris is Eddie's son, by the way. I feel like most people watching this are already like big fans of the show, but I'm explaining it just in case someone just decided to watch this randomly. You know, kudos to you. I'll try my best to explain everything, but I'm pretty shit at explaining things, so I do apologize, but I'm doing my best. Chris tries to get in the room, but like the room's locked, so he calls Buck, and Buck seemed just like genuinely happy to get a call from Chris, which was kind of cute until like Buck realized the context of the call because Chris was freaking out, rightfully so. I would be too. Buck gets to Eddie's house and he literally breaks down the door, which was so cool. And it relates to, I think it was season 1, where Captain Nash is giving Buck advice about his relationship with Abby, because Abby's mum, it was either when she was like really sick or like after she died. I think it was when she was still sick, and Bobby talking about essentially like stepping into her mess and like, you know, helping her through it. And also kind of relates to in episode 3 when Eddie and Anna break up and Anna's made a big old mess in the kitchen, and after Eddie breaks up with her, she's like, well, it's your mess now. Buck not only steps into the mess, but like breaks through the physical barrier so that then he can step into the mess with him, and I think that's good metaphor. I wish I was smart enough to have figured that out on my own, but a lot of people on Twitter noticed it. So shout out to you literary film students. So anyway, yeah, Buck breaks into the mess. Eddie's in a state. Of course he's in a state. He's in California. It cuts to another scene and it's basically implied that Buck has put Chris to bed.
Okay, buddy. Okay, we're right out here.
Which is so sweet and kind of domestic, but you know, regardless of if you think Buddy is real or not, I think that Buck was a really good friend in this situation. Buck tells Eddie that like Chris is still scared and that he's not the only one, and Eddie starts crying or continues crying and explains that the 4 people he saved in Afghanistan had died. One died while they were serving overseas, another one had a car crash, another one overdosed, and the person that we see him calling had committed suicide the year before. So he has a lot of survivor's guilt surrounding this, about how like he didn't save them. He got them out of a dangerous situation, but he didn't save them. And the scene of him breaking down was honestly a long time coming, because Eddie's always been so bottled up, and it was about damn time he had a breakdown. I think we could all use a bit of a breakdown every once in a while. Maybe not to that extent, maybe just like little breakdowns every now and then, so that it doesn't, you know, bottle up and become a bigger thing, because it's just tiring physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. It was also an interesting shift in the relationship between Buck and Eddie, because Eddie's usually the one giving advice and comforting Buck, like in season 4, for example, when Buck's dealing with his shitty parents and Eddie's being a good friend to him. It was very interesting to see the roles reversed in this scenario. And I hate giving credit to men, but Ryan Guzman did brilliantly this season, especially in that breakdown scene. Like, his acting was incredible. So episode 14 basically begins with a nightmare sequence. I was really proud of myself because I don't notice things a lot, but as soon as like this nightmare sequence was playing, like I understood immediately that it was a dream sequence because it didn't start nightmare-y. It just started as like a normal breakfast between Eddie and Chris. And I was like, there's no way that this is real. I was watching this with my housemates as well. And I was like, this has to be a dream. Like, this is not real. And they're like, nah, like Eddie's trying to make things normal with Chris. And I'm like, that's also fair. But then Eddie's leg started bleeding and I was like, yep, I'm actually right for once. Because like my housemates are really good at like, you know, predicting when things are gonna happen and that kind of stuff. But I was just really happy that I figured something out because I'm just not that analytical. Or if I am, it's because I've watched something like 3 times and I'm like, I can pick it up, you know, because you kind of have that foresight because you've already seen it. Eddie wakes up, he's on the couch and Captain Nash is there giving him coffee. I think this scene is implied to have happened the day after the breakdown, I think. And I only found this out the other day because someone on Twitter posted something. Captain Nash gives him some coffee. Eddie's like, oh shit, like, where's Chris?
Buck already took him to school. Figured you could use the sleep.
I mean, they're literally 2 dads raising their son. It's quite incredible. And like Eddie talks to Captain Nash, they have a good little talk. He's still wrestling with his survivor's guilt, which is something we see throughout this episode. Eddie talks to Chris for real in this episode. They have a good conversation. I love the healthy communication between the 2 of them. They've always been good at communicating, which I think comes down to Eddie's fear of becoming like his father, because his father was like emotionally closed off and just didn't really allow Eddie to have any feelings, really. So Eddie's always been good at encouraging Chris and being like, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to be angry, like I'm here for you, whatever you need. Chris asks Eddie if he is one of the things that makes his dad sad.
The things that make you sad? Am I one of them?
Never.
I love Eddie. I wish he was my dad. In episode 16, just before the dispatch fire happens, there's like a guy who's fixing the fire suppression system thingy. Josh, who's one of the supervisors at dispatch, mentions the fire suppression guy and Eddie's like gaydar immediately goes off.
Fire suppression system. Is that the sprinklers or the new cast? It's that waterless system.
Yeah, it sucks all the oxygen out of a room. I met the guy who was installing it.
If you met him, you should go talk to him.
Only gay people can pick up on that shit. I don't really know what to say about that other than Eddie has a gaydar because he's gay. And no, I will not elaborate on that any further. Before the fire goes off, Linda, one of the dispatchers, notices that Eddie isn't really feeling his job. She gives him some good advice that her mother gave her, and the advice is something along the lines of like, God will show you where you're meant to be, like what kind of job you're meant to have. And even though like I'm not religious or anything, I don't think Eddie is either. I believe in the universe and that kind of bullshit, but I do believe it because it just makes sense to me that like you're gonna have a feeling of like where you're meant to go, and like life circumstances and that kind of stuff will kind of veer you towards that direction. So like when the dispatch fire occurs, immediately Eddie swings into firefighter mode, trying to put out the fire, helping the 118 like however he can. At the end of the episode, Linda looks at Eddie in his turnout gear and she just says, God has spoken. And Eddie gives her a big old smile, which I love because this is the happiest I think he has been this season up until that point, and maybe even just like the entire season. And it's just nice to see that like his headspace was better and that he was enjoying his job. Well, not his job because he's like, you know, he's still working at the dispatch, but he seemed happy doing what he was doing. Episode 18, Eddie shows up at Bobby's house again and he makes a joke. He's like, I promise I don't have any transfer requests in my hand, which is kind of funny. I like this, I don't know the cinematic word for it, but like the repetition of like him going to Bobby's house because it shows how greatly Eddie's mental state has improved. Like, he just seems a lot better, and I'm so happy for him. So like, after the whole situation of Jonah using his paramedic powers to, like, you know, bring people to the brink of death to then bring them back to life, Eddie explains to Bobby that what Jonah did wasn't Bobby's fault, because he's been like carrying the guilt of that, being like, I'm a captain, I should have known something was off. But you can never really know that unless, you know, someone's genuinely shows it. But Jonah was good at hiding it. And he basically explains that if Bobby is going to take responsibility for Jonah's actions, that he should also take responsibility for him, for Eddie, because Bobby's advice, telling him he needed help, that kind of thing, it genuinely saved Eddie and also his son Chris's life, just for like making him realize that he needed help dealing with all his bottled up feelings. And it definitely shows his progression throughout this second half of the season and how greatly he has improved. Just like a random thought about this season and just like Eddie in general, I guess. I find it interesting that like Anna hasn't been mentioned like even once post breakup. Like, if it happened in a season finale, I'd kind of understand, because there's usually like a 4-month time jump because of like the 4 months that occurs between seasons. But like, it happened at the beginning of season 5 and she was never mentioned again, especially since it was like a whole storyline of Chris not wanting to get attached to another person just to watch them leave. Like, it would have been good to like have, you know, maybe Chris have that conversation with Eddie on screen, but the writers are sometimes lazy and just go, oh, that conversation happened off screen, and it's like, we want to see it. We want to see a conversation, or even just like a mentioning of the conversation. Chris has been off since the breakup or something like that. But like, she hasn't been mentioned since. Like, Buck hasn't brought it up. No one's brought it up, especially since she like went to the firehouse. I feel like people would be asking like, where's Anna? It's just so bizarre. And I feel like it's because Eddie's gay. And no, I will not elaborate any further, Your Honor. So now we're into the meat of the video, what I assume people would click on this for me to talk about Buddy. So in episode 11, we have like part 2 of a kitchen scene. Not as sexual, not sexual at all actually, but similar relationship vibes. I don't know. Eddie hosts dinner at his place and Buck, Eddie, Taylor and Chris are there. Buck talks to Eddie about him coming back to the firehouse because Buck misses him. Aww, so cute. Kiss. Buck also notices that Eddie is tired. He then says, you don't need to pretend with me, which is so relationship coded, I swear. And then Eddie says, you need to move on, I have, which is so relationship coded. And also, Eddie can cook now. What in the fanfic is this? Because Eddie used to be a really shit cook, at least according to Buck and Chris, and they would know. No judgment, by the way, I can't cook either. Like, every time I cook pasta, I somehow burn it. Don't ask me how. I don't know either. But it seems like they pulled their shit straight out of fan fiction. I've already kind of touched on this scene as a whole, but I'll talk about it from Eddie's perspective. This is the same scene where Buck and Lucy kiss. The firefighters, like after that save, they go to the bar and Eddie plans to meet up with them after their shift, but he sees Buck laughing with Lucy and Eddie leaves. Is this jealous Eddie pining era? Maybe? Because like the camera work, like it intentionally just focuses on Buck. Everyone else is either blurry or like, you know, covering their face from the camera, and it just focuses on Buck having a good time with a new potential love interest, and Eddie's like, I thought I was the love interest, so fuck this shit, I'm out of here. When Captain Nash is finding replacements for Eddie and Chim, he states that he's been trying for about 3 months to find replacements that both Hen and Buck approve of. Eddie says that they're just not ready to move on, parallel to Eddie telling Buck that he needs to move on. We know that Hen and Chim are besties and they're not romantic coded at all, mainly because Hen is a lesbian and Chim has never shown a romantic attraction towards Hen. And they've both been in relationships for like most of the series. Like Hen's been married for the entire series and longer, and Chim has had like other romantic interests. Buddie feels different just because of how close they are, and they usually like get into relationships and break up at similar times. In episode 13, in the opening scene, Maddie and Buck reunite, the cutest siblings. I wish they were my siblings. And in the reuniting scene, Buck's wearing a gay zebra tee, which I didn't notice until someone posted a screenshot. And even when I was watching this, I didn't realize, and I had to like go back because I asked the person on Twitter like what episode it was. So I had to like scroll through the episode roughly to figure out what the frick. Yeah, Maddie and Buck reunite, and then Hen and Chim also reunite. They cut back and forth between the two of them while they catch up about like what each other have missed over the past 6 months. One of the first things, if not the first thing, Buck tells Maddie is that Eddie quit the 180, and then he tells Maddie that he asked his girlfriend to move in with him.
Eddie quit?
Bobby replaced me?
You asked Taylor to move in with you?
Which just really shows what his priorities are. Maddie says that her and Buck are a pair, the fugitive and the settler. She is the fugitive because she often runs away from her problems, and he's the settler, mainly in relationships, especially with Taylor, which I've kind of already discussed. In episode 14, Eddie comes back from a therapy session and like Buddie are just being super domestic. It's kind of similar to the scene in episode 4, the construction on Sunset one. Yeah, being real domestic and cute and shit. So Eddie gets 2 drawings. One of them is of an anatomical heart that Chris drew, and then the other one is of like a love heart that Buck drew. Buck makes a joke that like he misunderstood the assignment. It's like, babe, you have a girlfriend. Don't give love notes to another person. But when I first watched this, I thought that like Chris did like the cute little love heart with like the pink and the sun, and that Buck did the anatomical one, and that's why he misunderstood the assignment. But like, now that I've realized that he did the love heart, it's just like so cute, and there's literally no hetero explanation for that. Like, I don't care how you try and spin it. That's the most gay shit I've ever seen, and I've been to Mardi Gras in Sydney, might I add, and that fucking goes off. The end of the episode, Buck takes Eddie to equine therapy, which is so cute. Some context for this scene: Buck and Taylor use each other for their jobs in the previous scene. Taylor gets info from Buck about Lucy's save that I mentioned earlier, and Buck gets info on Charlie from the end of season 4, where Eddie saved him from his toxic mother who was like drugging him and basically using him for sympathy so then she could get money from like GoFundMe and that kind of thing. In the equine therapy, they're kind of color coordinated, and people said that they were like Folkmore and Evermore, and I think that's kind of cute. I'm not a huge Taylor stan, don't fucking come for me, but I do agree. And in episode 14, Eddie's kind of been wrestling with this idea of like whether or not saving people is worth it, especially because he's still dealing with his survivor's guilt. And Buck takes him to equine therapy, and Chris gets to ride the horses. Again, just 2 dads hanging out with their son. Buck and Eddie have a little heart-to-heart moment, and they talk about the shooting that happened after Charlie got saved. I wish they spoke more about the shooting, but I'm glad they brought it up again because I was just really worried that would be like buried under the hatchet or whatever the quote is. Eddie notices that Charlie's at the equine therapy place, and Buck says Charlie got the help he needed and that started with you, and Buck just reminds him of the importance of Charlie getting the help he needed, because he looks a lot healthier. Like at the end of season 4, he was just like super pale and white and frail, but he looks healthier, he looks happier. He's living with his auntie, so he's in a lot of a better like living situation with people that care about him and aren't trying to slowly kill him. After seeing how well Charlie's doing and how Eddie saved him, and Buck basically says, "That's got to be worth something, right?" And Eddie says yes. And he smiles for probably the first time in the second half of season 5, which just makes my heart really happy. In episode 16, in the dispatch fire, Buck and Eddie are working on the fire suppression guy. Buck is rambling, like always, about, I don't know, he goes on tangents because headcanon he has ADHD. He starts talking about like when he had blood clots, and Eddie starts panicking when Buck is talking about this, and he's like, "Buck, shut up." And there are 2 possible interpretations. One, Eddie wants to stop Buck talking so fire suppression guy, aka Carson, doesn't freak out. I don't remember what his injuries are, but I think it was something to do with his leg. Second interpretation, Eddie wants to stop Buck talking because he hates to hear about one of the worst moments in Buck's life, especially because Buck like passed out in front of Eddie. In front of a lot of people, but like also Eddie. So I don't think he wants to be reminded of that. So later in that episode, they're at the hospital because Captain Nash is like a patient there after the roof fucking fell on him. Buck and Eddie are talking, and Buck notices that Taylor and Lucy are talking. In any other scenario, right, this would be kind of like where you would start to get worried, because it's like, oh, like, you know, my girlfriend and the person I cheated with are talking, you know, that would be kind of worrying. Like, oh shit, like what are they saying to each other? Like what if they found out? He's worried for like literally 0.2 seconds, and then he's like, anyway, let me talk to my boyfriend. I don't think Taylor ever finds out that Lucy was the other woman. I mean, it could be interpreted either way, of like Lucy's a threat and could be trying to, you know, start a relationship with Buck, or that she knows but she's not explicitly saying anything. Episode 17, I only have like a couple small notes because they didn't interact too much. Buck is at Eddie's house before Eddie and Chris go to Texas because Eddie is visiting his family. I find it funny that Buck's there. Like, why are you there? Eddie had just come back from Claudette's funeral. I don't know if Buck was there or not because he's like not wearing like a suit. So I don't know if he was there or not. Like if he was, that makes sense. But if not, like why are you there? Just to like hang out with your boyfriend? In this conversation, he seems a lot more in love with Eddie than he does his actual girlfriend. And I think that's quite funny, even though they're literally just talking about like toothbrushes and shit like that. I don't know. Episode 18, baby. Buddie are fixing the holes in the room. There's a callback to the "you're the guy that likes to fix things" conversation in the first half of season 5. And by the way, they're doing like such a shit job at patching up the walls. And also Buck is wearing bright white shoes. And it's like, if you're going to like fix a wall where you're gonna be like using, I don't know, like chemicals and shit. I've never had to patch up a wall before. Like you would assume that you'd want to wear not bright white shoes. It just very much seems like Eddie is trying to find an excuse to hang out with Buck. Like, sweetie, just ask him out on a date. He'll say yes. This isn't like specifically buddy coded, but it could be. Maddie and Buck are talking, and Buck is talking about a case that they had just worked on where one of the patients lost like 7 years of their life due to amnesia. So he couldn't remember the past 7 years. So he couldn't remember his wife, couldn't remember that she was pregnant and like just had a baby. And they, without mentioning the movie, which is sus, but they spoke about the movie 50 First Dates and how Buck thought it was like a nightmare scenario. And Maddie's like, I think it's meant to be sweet, like someone, you know, working to like make someone fall in love with you every day. And Buck's basically explaining how love is meant to be about how when you're both at your worst and there's, you know, every possible reason for you guys to give up, but you guys continue fighting. I feel like 2 interpretations. One, he's explaining how his current relationship with Taylor isn't that, and that he just doesn't want to fight anymore. Or secondly, he's talking about his relationship with Eddie and how they've gone through so much together over the past, what, like 4 years? Trials and tribulations, up and down, like couple of fights, Eddie's breakdown, reasons why maybe someone would want to like run away, but instead they keep fighting for each other and are there for each other. That is basically my analysis, and by my analysis I mean screenshots from Twitter that I'm speaking out loud because people on that app are a lot smarter than me, so I'm just taking their content and turning it into this. So thank you, you absolute legends, for helping me create content. Just some concluding thoughts. Buddie isn't the reason I started watching this show, but Buddie, to be honest, is like the main reason I continue to watch the show. It's important to note that there are other amazing aspects of this show. Some highlights include Jonah's villain story. I think that was interesting. The relationship between Henrietta and Karen. They have such a cute marriage. May's storyline as being a dispatcher, being so young and figuring out if she wants to go to college or not. Madney reuniting, which I spoke about, and Maddie's mental health journey, which I also spoke about. Although I think it would be nice if Buddie got together because I think they work. I would also understand if they kept it as them just being best buds. I just wish they wouldn't borderline queerbait. But anyway, I will go down with this ship. I think it has the possibility to be endgame if the writers weren't such fucking cowards. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching, and I will see you in the next video, which, knowing me, will be in like 6 months. Bye!